It began with a scream and a siren. In the quiet hours before dawn, flames tore through an apartment building in Chicago's Austin neighborhood. Inside, families asleep, dreams interrupted, lives changed forever. When the smoke cleared, 4 people were gone: a respected journalist, a devoted mother, her sister, and a little boy who never made it out. What no one knew that morning was that this fire wasn't an accident. It was the end of a heartbreak and the beginning of a citywide search for answers. A young man, a broken heart, and a single act that turned love into loss and a neighborhood into mourning. Chicago, a city built on resilience. From the ashes of its great fire in 1871, it rose again, stronger than before. And within its vast urban sprawl lies Austin, a proud West Side neighborhood known not for skyscrapers or skyline views, but for its heart. Here, neighbors still greet each other by name. Families stay for generations. And even through hardship, this community has always found ways to rebuild. But in the summer of 2025, that strength would be tested once again. It was June 26th, a humid Thursday morning, when the air hung heavy with the promise of rain. For most, it began like any other day. For a few, it would end in tragedy. At 5 a.m., the Austin community woke to sirens, a sound that meant something was terribly wrong. A 3-story apartment building on North Laramie Avenue was burning. Within minutes, smoke filled the streets. Families stumbled into the night, barefoot, calling out for loved ones who didn't answer. When dawn finally broke, the neighborhood stood still. The fire had claimed 4 souls, each one beloved, each one leaving behind a hole that words could never fill. Among them was 76-year-old Brad Cummings, a lifelong journalist and advocate known for giving a voice to Austin's unheard. Sisters Regina and Destiny Henry, both in their 20s, known for their kindness and strength, and Regina's little boy, Jason, just 5 years old, a child with a laugh that once echoed through these same streets, now filled with silence. For a neighborhood already burdened with decades of struggle, poverty, disinvestment, and forgotten promises, this fire felt deeply personal. Because in Austin, when one family hurts, everyone hurts. As investigators sifted through what remained, whispers began to spread. This wasn't just a tragedy. It was something darker, something done on purpose. And as rumors turned into evidence, the city realized this wasn't merely a story about fire. It was about heartbreak, anger, and choices that can never be undone. In a place known for its resilience, Austin was once again forced to rise from the ashes, but this time, the flames weren't started by chance. They were lit by someone who once called it home. Before the headlines, before the tragedy, there were lives filled with purpose, laughter, and love, each of them connected not just by a building, but by the invisible threads of community. Brad Cummings was 76 years old. For most of his life, he was a storyteller, a journalist who believed that even the smallest neighborhoods deserved a platform. As editor of the Austin Voice, Brad chronicled the community's victories, struggles, and dreams. He was known for showing up where few reporters did, at school board meetings, neighborhood cleanups, church gatherings, anywhere there was a story of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. In a world that often overlooked the West Side, Brad reminded the city that Austin mattered. His newspaper didn't just report the news, it carried the heart of the community. Friends say Brad had plans to retire that year, but not before finishing one final story about how local families were rebuilding from hardship. That story would never be written. 32-year-old Regina Henry was known for her strength. A mother, a sister, a daughter, she carried her family with quiet resilience. Friends describe her as the kind of woman who found light in every dark situation. She worked long hours, but always made time for her two children, Jason and Kyle. She dreamed of becoming a nurse, hoping to give back to the same hospitals that had once cared for her own family. And when life became complicated, when relationships broke apart and challenges mounted, Regina stood firm. Her focus was always her boys. Everything she did was for them. Those who knew her say she had been looking forward to a new chapter, one filled with peace and promise. But that future was stolen in an instant. Regina's sister Destiny Henry was 28 years old, a caregiver by nature. She was the kind of person who checked in on everyone, who never let a friend face hardship alone. When she wasn't working, she was with her nephews, the children she treated as her own. Neighbors recall how often Destiny looked after kids in the building, making sure they were safe, fed, and smiling. Her warmth was infectious, her laugh unforgettable. On that tragic morning, Destiny's final moments were spent doing what she had always done, protecting others. And though the fire took her, her selflessness would become one of the most remembered acts of that night. 5-year-old Jason Henry was the heartbeat of his family, bright, playful, and endlessly curious. He loved cartoons, building things, and racing down the hallway with his little brother. Teachers at his preschool said Jason was always the first to share his crayons, the first to comfort another child who was sad. His laughter filled every room, a sound his family says they'll never forget. When people gathered after the fire, they didn't just mourn a little boy. They mourned a lifetime of memories that would never be made. The first day of school, the birthdays, the laughter that once echoed through Austin's streets. In tragedies like this, numbers often blur faces. But behind every headline are names. Behind every name, a life. And behind each life, a community forever changed. They were more than victims. They were teachers, caregivers, dreamers, and neighbors. And to understand what happened next, we must first understand what was lost.
Every tragedy has a timeline, a sequence of moments, decisions, emotions that eventually collide into something irreversible. And in the case of the Austin apartment fire, those moments began not with flames, but with heartbreak. In the days leading up to June 26, 2025, 23-year-old Luntrell Clark was described by friends as withdrawn, a once lively young man from Chicago's West Side, quiet now, distracted and angry. Those closest to him said he'd been struggling to accept the end of his relationship. His ex-girlfriend had moved on, and not just with anyone, but with someone from within his own circle of friends. Heartbreak can cut deep, but for some, it becomes a spark. And for Luntrell, that spark was about to become something much darker. Investigators would later piece together that in the early morning hours of June 26th, Clark's emotions boiled over. Cell phone records show a string of missed calls to his ex, unanswered. Witnesses recall seeing him pacing outside the apartment building near North Central Avenue just before dawn. Surveillance cameras later confirmed his presence. At 3:47 a.m., neighbors reported the first strange sound, a car door slamming, then footsteps. Moments later, the quiet street erupted with orange light. The fire moved fast. too fast for an accidental blaze. Within minutes, the three-story building was engulfed. The Chicago Fire Department arrived within 6 minutes, but by then, the structure was already collapsing from the inside. Inside were the people whose lives would be taken that morning. Brad Cummings, the 76-year-old journalist whose words lifted his community. Regina Henry, a mother expecting her third child. Her daughter, Destiny, brave beyond her years. And Gian, Regina's young son. All caught in a fire no one could escape. In those final moments, chaos and courage intertwined. Witnesses described screams for help, the sound of breaking glass, and firefighters rushing in despite the searing heat. One child, Kyle Henry, was pulled out alive, clinging to life in critical condition. He would become the only survivor of that apartment unit. The cause of the fire was initially uncertain. Some thought it was electrical. Others suspected a cooking accident. But investigators quickly found something that changed everything. Traces of accelerant near the stairwell and entry points. Within 24 hours, the Chicago Police Department's arson investigation unit determined the blaze was intentional. Security footage showed a figure leaving the building moments before the fire erupted, matching Clark's clothing from earlier that night. Digital forensics confirmed what the cameras could not. Messages sent from Clark's phone revealed a dangerous emotional spiral. One read, "If I can't have peace, neither can they." It was a chilling preview of what was to come. In the aftermath, neighbors gathered on sidewalks, some in disbelief, others in tears. A once quiet neighborhood now stood in ruins. The smell of smoke lingered for days, but for the families, it was the silence afterwards that hurt the most. Detectives moved quickly. Using surveillance timestamps, digital evidence, and witness interviews, they traced Clark's movements. He was arrested days later without resistance. Authorities charged him with multiple counts of first-degree murder and arson, each carrying the weight of the lives lost. During the initial hearing, prosecutors presented the timeline, the surveillance, the phone data, the witness accounts. The defense remained silent, asking for time to review. But for the victims' families, every moment in court felt like reliving the fire all over again. The city mourned not only the loss of 4 lives, but the reality of how easily grief and anger can ignite destruction. In the weeks that followed, the charred building became a makeshift memorial. Flowers lining the sidewalk, candles burning night after night. For detectives, the case was closed. But for the community, the questions still echoed through the streets of Austin. What could have stopped it? Could someone have intervened? A friend, a neighbor, a system that saw the signs before it was too late? Was this just a crime of passion or a failure of compassion? In the end, justice may bring answers, but it will never bring them back. Luntrell Clark, charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder and aggravated arson, trial pending. Do you think this was a crime of passion or a moment of calculation? Could heartbreak alone explain such destruction, or was there something deeper driving it? Tell us what you think in the comments below. Your perspective matters.
In the aftermath of tragedy, time seems to slow. Streets once filled with laughter become quiet. The smell of smoke fades, but the memories do not. And in Chicago's Austin neighborhood, that silence spoke volumes. The community gathered in heartbreak. Strangers, neighbors, family, all drawn to the same corner where light once turned to fire. They came with candles, with tears, with questions, and with a determination that no flame would ever erase their love for those lost. They remembered Brad Cummings, the veteran journalist whose words inspired a generation to speak up. They remembered Regina Henry, the devoted mother whose strength was her family's anchor. Destiny Henry, who died trying to save her son. And the unborn child who would never see the world their mother hoped to give them. For those who lived through that night, healing didn't come easily. Some still hear the echoes, the sirens, the shouts, the sound of collapsing walls. But from those ashes rose something powerful: unity. Local leaders, pastors, and activists stepped forward, turning pain into purpose. Vigils became rallies. Rallies became petitions, and petitions became a movement calling for two things: stronger domestic violence awareness and stricter fire safety measures in older apartment buildings. The message was clear. This wasn't just about one man's actions. It was about the cracks that let tragedy slip through: emotional isolation, untreated trauma, outdated housing codes, and a city that too often reacts after the loss instead of before. In one of the most powerful moments, Brad Cummings' former colleagues at the Voice newspaper published a special edition, not to mourn him, but to continue his mission. The front page read simply, "From the ashes, we will speak." Across social media, the story spread beyond Chicago. Thousands shared messages of support, from journalists honoring Brad's legacy to mothers sharing Regina's story, promising to be more aware of early signs of domestic pain. Community organizations began offering counseling to survivors and families. Donations poured in for Kyle Henry, the only surviving child of that apartment unit, still recovering in intensive care. In his fight to live, many found a reason to keep going. But for many, healing meant more than remembrance. It meant accountability. At City Hall, residents demanded reforms: new sprinkler systems in aging buildings, faster emergency response coordination, and stronger protective measures for those facing domestic turmoil. The fire became a catalyst for change, a painful lesson etched into the city's conscience. It wasn't just a story of loss anymore. It was a story of what can happen when heartbreak meets inaction, and how a community can refuse to let that cycle continue. Months after the fire, new life began to grow where tragedy once stood. The building was torn down. In its place, plans emerged for a memorial garden, a peaceful space where stories could be remembered, not erased. And as time moved forward, the question shifted from why it happened to how we move forward. How do we, as a society, recognize the quiet warning signs before they ignite? How do we protect the vulnerable, heal the brokenhearted, and make sure no family ever endures what this one did? In every tragedy, there are lessons waiting to be heard, not just by those who lost, but by all of us who remain. Lessons about love, anger, forgiveness, and how quickly life can change in the heat of one decision. For the people of Austin, healing continues, and while justice moves slowly, hope still burns, quietly but brightly, in the hearts of those determined to rebuild what was lost. What do you think? Can a community truly heal from something like this? Should the city have done more to prevent it? And what changes would you like to see to make sure stories like this never happen again? In the heart of Chicago's West Side, time continues to move. But for those who lost everything on that June morning, the scars remain. The fire that tore through Austin was more than an act of destruction. It was a mirror held up to all of us, reflecting what can happen when heartbreak, anger, and silence collide. Brad Cummings' words once filled his newspaper pages with stories of hope, change, and justice. Even in his death, his legacy reminds us that communities rise through compassion. Regina Henry's love for her children remains the heartbeat of a movement calling for awareness and safety. Destiny's courage, her final act of selflessness, still inspires every mother, every daughter, every soul who believes in the power of love stronger than fear. In the month that followed, as reforms were proposed and awareness campaigns began, the people of Austin reminded the world that tragedy doesn't define a neighborhood, unity does. Justice is a process, healing is a journey, but remembrance, that's eternal. Every time a candle is lit, every story retold, every life rebuilt, their names are spoken into tomorrow. And maybe that's the lesson this tragedy leaves behind. That love when silenced by anger can destroy, but love when shared in grief can rebuild. So we ask you, not just as a viewer, but as someone who believes in change, what can you do to make sure no one's pain ever turns into another tragedy? Could you check in on a friend who's hurting? Speak up when something feels wrong. Advocate for safer homes, stronger laws, and kinder hearts. Because that's what true justice really means. Not just punishment, but prevention. Not just remembering the lost, but protecting the living. The Austin community will never forget June 26, 2025. Neither should we. Their names, their stories, their light will continue to guide us. In memory of Brad Cummings, Regina Henry, Destiny Henry, and the unborn child lost that morning. May their stories bring change. And if you believe their story deserves to be heard, share this video. Help their voices echo beyond this screen. Subscribe for more stories that seek truth, empathy, and justice, because awareness is where healing begins, and healing is how we honor them. What part of this story stayed with you the most? Do you think justice will ever truly feel complete, or does healing mean something different? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if stories like this remind you of the strength in humanity, subscribe, share, and keep the conversation alive, because remembering is the first step towards change.